Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest Grist webinar. It's the third webinar. Previously, we talked about good ways to organize data in Grist and the DRY principle, the don't repeat yourself principle. And then we also had a webinar about formulas, including trigger formulas, which is a somewhat advanced and very helpful idea that allows data cleaning and as well as recording when an entry was created or updated or by whom. And you can find these previous webinars on YouTube where we have a playlist. I think somebody might put Anais might put a link to the playlist in the chat. And the recording of this webinar will be added there too afterwards. So these past webinars were about organizing data, tying it together, and specifying the logic around it. In a way, they teach you how to be a creator of an application using Grist. In this webinar today, I'd like to talk about bringing in external data to understand it. So here we'll have the role of a data scientist trying to get insight from your data. And before I start, let me just share some recent updates about Grist in case you missed our monthly newsletter at the end of November. We've released imports into existing tables, additional features to it, which is to allow you to map columns. And I'll actually talk more about it today, and we'll show an example. There are now more sorting options for sorting your tables. We've added support for a donut chart, a new type of chart, and I'll actually show an example of it today too. And there is a newer version of Python 3.9, which now powers all new documents. And you'll be excited about that if you are a Python pro and want to use all the latest features. Also, we added a few more templates to the template gallery. There is one for recruiting, for portfolio performance, and for event speakers. So feel free to check those out. Okay. With that out of the way, let's begin. And in today's webinar, we'll use an example where we have a company, an organization, and we'll be analyzing its expenses, credit card expenses. So I'll start with a clean document. Here is my document. This is what you get when you click Create New Document, an empty table with no rows. And here I'll import some credit card data. So you can click here to add new. This is the button to click to add anything to the document, whether page or more data. So to add more data, click Import from File. I'm selecting a CSV file, which I downloaded from the credit card website. And I get like a nice big preview here. Says this is where I'm importing from, activity1.csv. I'm importing into a new table. That's what I want. This is the data being imported. It all looks reasonable. I'll click import. And now I have this data in Grist. It knows what the column names are. That comes from this CSV file. It named the table activity1 because that's what the file was named. I don't need the one. That table 1 here was the initial page, an initial table that's created by default for new documents. I don't need this. I'll delete it. And so here is some credit card data. And the question we ask is, what's in it? How do we understand it? How do we get any insights into it? So let's see what's in our data. We have a date. That's very helpful. From here, we can analyze things by year or by month. If we want to, we have a description. This is very informative. We want to see what's actually in our data, what kind of expenses there were, but it's too detailed. Card member, this seems useful. We have several employees who have a credit card. All expenses go into this account. The account number is the last 5 digits, I guess, of the credit card. And then the amount, how much they spent, a bunch more extra details that the credit card company provides, a reference number, which seems to be an identifier for the transaction, and category. Category, I think, would be another very useful thing to understand, because that can allow us to get higher level view of where the expenses are. To begin with, let's look at the card member. Let's just see how much different card members spent. So I will add a page. And when I select data, I'll select data from our one table, activity table. And I'll click this summation button. This is what makes a summary table. In Grist, a summary table is equivalent to an Excel's pivot table, or at least very similar, serves a similar purpose. When you summarize data, here I want to group it by card member. That's because for each card member, I want to have its own row, because I want to see the total of all the amounts that card member spent. Here, I'll point out something that trips people up often, which is when you want to create a summary of your data and to see for each card member, you want to see an amount. Only card member determines how data is grouped. The amount is derived from them. The amount is the sum of everything for this card member. But for the selection of what to group by, you should only select the fields, could be one or multiple, which determine how to group the data. And so here I want to group it by card member, so I'll only select this one field. I'll add a page, and here's what I get. There are 3 employees that have a credit card. So there are 3 card members. For each member, I see a count of how many transactions in my imported data I had for this card member. And then I have some numerical columns. The amount, I understand. That's kind of what I was hoping to see, the sum of all the amounts. And the account, I don't understand. If I hit enter here to see the formula, I'll see that it's the sum of all the account formulas, values. And the reason is that the account happened to be a numerical column. So Grist thought it would be helpful to add it up. And really, that's just because it's a negative integer because of how the credit card exports it. And actually, I'm just going to convert this one to text, because it really doesn't represent any kind of amount. It's just part of the string that represents the credit card number. So let's rename this page to card members. Well, now that I converted text, this column is pointless, but let's just remove it. I use Alt- shortcut to remove a column. And now we can make things a little bit nicer. For example, amount could be a dollar amount. Let me change it to be a dollar amount here as well. And let's look at this again. One thing that's kind of unhelpful is that I see a negative number for one of the card members. The reason is there are some negative numbers here, because the numbers that represent payments to the credit card are included in the data. But they're not helpful to understanding how much expenses this card member had. It's just that the payments are attributed to this card member. So it's really, to understand the data, it makes sense to separate the expenses from the payments. And to do that, we can use a formula. So this amount column includes both positive and negative amounts. In this data, the positive amounts are the expenses. So here's payment for some payroll service, and here's a cashback and the payment for the credit card. So the payments are the negative ones. So let's add a column called expense and say that for any amount that's positive, greater than or equal to 0, we want to include it because that's an expense. So I'll say we'll make it a formula. We'll start typing with an equal sign to make it a formula. You can click on a column to insert its name. So we want to use this column if this column is greater than or equal to 0. Else, when it's not greater or equal to 0, we'll use none. None is a special Python keyword for making an empty value. And so then the values that were negative are now blank, and the values that are positive are here. And we can tell Grist that really this value will always be numeric, so that we can have the options to format it as a number. And by the same idea, we can use to create another column for, well, I will name it credits, where I will include only the negative amounts. So still I will use the amount, but now only if it's less than 0, and otherwise I'll keep it blank. And this one also make numeric and format as a number. So now all the data, all the amounts I've split into a column of positive ones and negative ones. And this will allow me to do this, to add them up separately here. This here is a summary table. That's what we added in front. You can, in the beginning of the analysis, here you can see the little summation icon. That's our sign that it's a summary table. The title of the widget also says that it's activity summarized by card member. And each column, if it's calculated, has an equal sign in the beginning, and you can double click it or look here to see what the formula is for it. And the formula is sum of $group.amount. $group represents all the records that are summarized by this line of the summary table. In other words, all the records for this card member. And we can basically use the same formula to add sums of the new columns we just added. So for expense, we can add sum of expense. And for credits, we can add sum of credits. Where is it? It helps you with auto completion. And these columns too can be marked as numeric. So we can format it as dollar amounts. And this part maybe I don't even need, because what's important for me now and more helpful in understanding is that these card members had this many expenses, different card members, different amount of expenses total. And the credits are the payments, cashbacks, and things like that. What else can we do? Let's add a widget here. Select activity again, select summarize again. And once you select summarize, you actually don't need to select anything for group by column. So what do you think happens if you select to group by nothing at all? Well, let's try it. You get a table with a single row. In fact, I'll add it on top. You look, there is a hint of what's going on here in the title. It says it's activity totals. So it's a single group of all rows, and the new values we got here are totals across all the rows. So the first one is count, 82. That's because we have 82 records in this table. See, 82 records here. I can rearrange the columns so that they are aligned. Expenses, the total of expenses, it's the same also of these 3 rows, and the credits, total of credits. And the amount, which I will keep here, is essentially the unpaid balance on my credit card. So that's one useful widget we could add, an overview of total expenses and the balance that's still outstanding. Another thing we can add that's super useful and quite different now from Excel's pivot tables is we can add the row data, not summarized. We can add row data for activity to the same page and selected by card member. This will link the newly added widget to this widget, activity by card member. And I will drag this below, rearrange my widget so I can see everything a little nicer. And what does this do? The fact that I link them means that I can click on different card members and my widget below will update. If you look at this column here, you'll see that it shows the transactions for Rich Ost. This one shows transactions for J Blue. And we have transactions for PinPub. So this makes it much easier to drill in to the data. Now I can select the card member and see just that card member's data. In fact, this includes kind of too much. I could go through and only leave the columns that I want to make it a more useful view for me. Alt-Shift- is a shortcut to hide a column. I like using the shortcuts because this makes everything more efficient. And I will keep in this case, the amount has everything I need, so I don't need expense and credits or the account. All these extended data fields are not very helpful either. So maybe I'll keep the category here. And so I can drill in to see these are all the transactions my data set for this person. Let's think about what else we can get from our data. Another field that we thought was useful was category. Let's take a look at this category field. You'll see there is some redundancy here, like fees and adjustment dash fees and adjustment. That just seems annoying. Business services, conferences, and training. Essentially, it looks like we have a higher level category dash and then a more specific category. To me, it seems that the higher level category isn't adding anything. So I'm just interested in the part after the minus sign. That'll make it easier for me to read and to understand the data. So let's just extract that. We can add a column for it. Maybe I'll call it category 1. And I want to talk about how do you split a string like this to extract the second part. And the easiest way is to select this value and use the Python split function. Split function takes one argument, which is what character to split on, and I want to split on minus. If I just hit enter here and see the results of this formula, I'll see that for each value, it split it on minus to produce an actual Python array or Python list of 2 strings. So here the first string is business services, the second string is conferences and training. If I only want to keep the last string, I could do it like so. In angle brackets, I can put in -1. -1 says, give me the first item counting backwards. That's what negative numbers do for Python lists. So the same thing as saying the last item. So I'll do that. And that's it. This is my part of my category that comes after the minus. This seems to be just as useful, but easier to read and shorter. Another thing we can do here that's helpful is we can change the column type to choice. The first time I do it, choice columns show a particular selection of choices, but Grist doesn't know yet what kind of choices I have in this column. There's actually been a request here that we should add a button to add all the current values to the existing choices, and I think we will be doing that. But meanwhile, there is a quick workaround. I can select all the values, copy them, click into this choice configuration, paste them all in. It actually pastes a lot of duplicate values for all of them. So it looks a little crazy, but let's just save it. And you'll see that Grist actually removed all the duplicates, created one entry for each of the choices. And now each choice looks like a little pill or tab or tag inside of my category column. And what's useful about this is we can also assign colors to them. So for example, I could say that this might be yellow and my fees would be reddish. And so on. And you can go through and assign colors, save, and now your data is more colorful. And as you'll see that those colors will stay now if we try to summarize by category. So actually, let me do that now. I'll add a new page. Same as before, I'm selecting activity, the table, I click on the summation icon, but now I want to summarize by category 1. So that's my choice of group column, group by column, add page, and here you go. For each category, maybe I'll sort it. The green checkbox saves the sort, so if I reload this document, I will still have this sort. The categories with the color, they still have this color here, so if I visually, it makes it easier to find things I'm looking for if I'm used to look at this data. And all my totals are here, so we can see that the biggest expense was internet purchase, presumably anything bought online, but the next one is insurance services. And here in this blank line with no categories, presumably that's all the payments made to the credit card. Let's remove this too. One more thing for this stage, wouldn't it be nice to see the category breakdown for each card member? And we can do that quite easily as well. So we'll add another widget to this page for activity, summarize it. If you want to see an amount for each card member and for each category, then you need to group by 2 columns. And for each combination of card member and category 1, it'll calculate the total. And this one I will also select by card member, so it will only show the total for the selected card member. So let me add this to page. Let me drag this here, give it a bit more space. I can once again hide the columns I don't need with a Alt-Shift-. I don't need JBlue because this column will always reflect whoever is selected here. So I can make this just include the stuff that's most useful to me. And so here I can see that maybe I'll sort it as well. So if it's sorted, things will always be kind of in a more consistent order. And whenever I select a person, I can see how the expenses are broken down by category for that person. If I select another person, I see that as well. And that's true for everyone. So I think that's pretty cool. And if you are interested in kind of getting this overview even more visually, you can click this change widget button. Same data, summarized the same way. It's important to select. I wanted to change this widget. It's important always to select the widget you're trying to change. We change this widget. So here I have the same data, summarized the same way by category 1 and card number. But for the widget itself, let's change it from table to chart. And it's still linked. Click save. What I want to try is not a bar chart, but let's try this new chart type that we added, the donut chart. And let's use the show total option. And I'll make the font a bit smaller because I have a small screen. And look at this. Now I can select the person, and it shows me the breakdown of my expenses by category for that person. And I can hover over to see the details of how much. And the total here will corresponds to the total for the person that I see in this table. So this is a dynamic chart. You can see that in some of our other templates and examples. Okay, now we come to one of the most useful reasons to spend your time organizing data in Grist, creating this layout, linking widgets, making things pretty with formatting and colors and everything. And what's useful is now I can actually import more data into the same source table, into the same table of activity, and all my constructions, all my structure that I've built on top of it will still work for me. So this is different from Excel. In Excel, if you use it a lot for this kind of stuff, you will know that you often need to kind of redo the same steps every month. In Grist, we hope you won't have to. So let's click here, import from file, and I have another file from a few more months of data. And let's see how to do that. The first preview screen I get is the same kind of screen I had before because it's saying import file activity 2.csv into new table. I need to tell Grist that I actually want to import it into an existing table. And this is fairly new feature of Grist that it allows it. And it shows you a different preview with some more options. This part looks very similar. This is what it sees my data to be. But here it tells you that it's mapping columns. And the reason here everything matches. The reason it matches is because this is data from the same data source. It's from the same credit card, so it has the same columns. So Grist, it's easy for Grist to match them up. It knows which column from my imported data goes into which column of my destination table. There's one thing you might want to do here, and that is to match existing records. There is an option here to update existing records. The reason you might want to do it is this. Imagine you imported, first you exported some credit card data. You got all the data through today, December 15. So this is some amount of data for December 15. And maybe at the end of the month, you decide to update it through the end of the year, and you get all the data for December from the 1st to the 15th. Now there is going to be some amount of data between the 1st and the 15th that are overlapping. If you import all of that data again without any kind of matching, you will just get duplicates for the transaction that happened during the overlap period. So to avoid duplicates, you want to find which records are actually being matched by this data so that you could update those records if anything changed, but you wouldn't create new records. To update existing records, you need to know what to match them on. And I think I noticed earlier here that there is a reference column, which seems to be a unique identifier for each transaction. So we will match them on this reference column. You can also match in multiple columns. Once I match it, it shows everything is green because actually in this example, there is no overlap. All the data is the same. If I had overlap, then some cells might be white because they haven't changed, and some will show the previous value and the new value if anything actually changed in those records. That wouldn't happen for credit card data, but it might happen for other kinds of data. Let's click import, see what happens. What happens is that now we have more records. If you remember, before we had 82, now we have 122. I might want to sort it. Maybe I'll put the most recent transactions on top. I'll save the sort, so it's always like this. Now let's look at our new, at our fancy pages. Here's our total. It's updated. I see the new count, more expenses, more credits. There is a balance now on the credit card, the bigger balance to pay. Everything has updated. My activity for each person includes now the activity all the way through to the most recent data. My chart has updated. There is now more categories of transactions because, well, for some of the card members at least. And if I look here, I think I also see some pink categories. So maybe restaurant and professional services are new categories for me. And you can see that here as well. So let me update this choice list in a minute, because firstly, I want to point out what's cool about this. The only thing I had to do now was to import more data. I didn't have to recreate any of this structure. I made it work for me before, and it still works for me now. Let me do a similar thing now with a different data set. I have another set of data from a different credit card. So import from file. This is from a different credit card. If you see, there is like different columns, not as many columns. The columns are different, but I want to import it into that same table of activity. And this is where this interface that allows you mapping columns, that's where this comes helpful. Here, I see, for example, the date. In my destination table called activity, I have date, but in my imported date, I don't have date. You can click this ... icon to see if I have anything else that I could use. I have transaction date. That seems relevant, so I'll pick this. Now it knows that where to get the dates from. The receipt is fine. I don't need the description. It matched because there is a column by the same name. The card member, for this credit card, let's say in my data, there's only one employee who uses this card. So I could use a formula to populate this data. And in this case, the formula will always return the same value. So it'll be a formula that returns a constant. It's still a formula, not a value. So to write a formula with a constant, I need to put the constant in quotes. So the constant will be JBlue. That's my pretend employee who made expenses on this credit card. And one more thing I notice here is that the amounts are mostly negative. Only the payment is positive. If you remember in my other data from the other credit card reported expenses as positive amounts and payments as negative. So I actually want to negate it. And what's interesting in this here, it's super powerful. It knows that amount matched, but it didn't know about this subtlety about negative numbers. But you can click here and you see this matching thing is just the formula still. And if I don't want the amount, but I want the negative the amount, I just put a minus sign in front. And as soon as I save it, all my numbers got updated to be the negative amounts so that it corresponds to what the other card reports. And the rest of the data is fine, and I have category. So let's click import, see what happens. Okay, I see a whole bunch of new transactions. They are attributed to JBlue. The account is not set. I didn't bother to set it. I don't know what it is. But the date, the amount, everything that matters to me is here. My expenses calculation is still here. And one thing that's annoying is that my categories are a lot of them are now red because this card reports different set of categories than the other card. But at least I can use the same trick to update the categories here. So I'll just paste on all the values down here, and let Grist take care of removing the duplicates. And so longer list of categories, but manageable. And everything looks good here. And I can see all my categories here. Now there's a bigger breakdown. This now includes all the data from both credit cards. Again, it's all up to date, as well as here. All the data has been updated. This now includes the total from both cards. And all my linking still works, and all my transactions are still linked in the way I set it up. So that's the main thing I wanted to show. And here I will take a pause and invite you to ask questions.
You can put questions in the chat.
Yeah. Please ask questions in the chat. There were some questions that were asked earlier in the sign-up form for the webinar, so I can go through those first. But I do encourage you to ask questions. In fact, once upon a time, I was a teacher in a high school, and when no students are speaking up, that's the worst thing. So I love a more interactive thing. Webinar is not that interactive for most of it, but for the question part, I'd love to hear questions. So we have a question here about, talk more about importing pivot tables. So there is no, the way Grist can import data from Excel, if you're talking about importing pivot tables that have already been set up in Excel or Google Sheets, Grist can only import the data itself, like the results of all the calculations. To actually recreate the calculations themselves, that needs to be done in Grist. So the best thing is not to import the pivot table from Excel, but to import the source data and then create a summary table like I described. And let me also read some questions from before. One person asked about webhooks. Well, let me just tell for anybody who isn't aware of it, I wasn't aware of it until what it actually means until we started working on this feature. But what webhooks means, it's when we talk about integrating two different products or two different data sources, sometimes you want, as soon as something happens in one product, for the other data source to find out about it, either to update the record or to take some action, like send an email or something. And so the technology kind of that allows things to hear about some event in real time in the context of these integration. That's what's called webhooks. So we implemented webhooks, but we've only enabled it so far for Zapier. So integrations using Zapier right now can use webhooks. If you go to Zapier and try to use the Grist app to integrate, Zapier calls it, I think, instant triggers. But instant triggers is kind of Zapier's way of referring to using webhooks provided by different services. So in this case, you can use Zapier to react immediately to something changing in Grist. For example, you can create a Zapier integration so that whenever a record gets added to your Grist document, you get an email about it or a Slack message. And that now works and is possible, and that would be using Zapier instant triggers. And we are going to work to make that available in more integrators that support webhooks. But for now, it's just in Zapier. We look at the next question. There was a question about uploading a file. So the question is, I have uploaded a file, but I do not know what to do next to find out correlations between columns. I'm not exactly sure what the question means, but one thing that it might mean is something that I've noticed here, for example. In this data set, if you look at there is a card member column and an account column. And the card number is the name, essentially, in this credit card that an employee has. An account number is the last 5 digits of the credit card. And these always go in pairs. So JBlue will always have this account number, and FinPuff will always have this account number. And that's really because our data got flattened into this data set, but really there is an idea for credit card that has both of these properties. And that's kind of at least how I understand that there is a correlation between these two columns. And one way to see it in Grist is I can add here a page, actually. And if I summarize by both card member and account, by the combination, I will see all possible combinations that occur in my data of card member and account. And see what I see here, where I see JBlue with this account and Richos with this account and Puff with this account. And they don't occur with other account numbers except for JBlue. And that's because I also imported data for JBlue from another card. So it doesn't have this corresponding account number. But this tells me that in my original data, at least, these are always correlated. They always go together. So that's one way you can get that kind of insight if you use summary tables to get all the combinations of these fields. If the person who has this question is on the call, feel free to ask again, to ask a follow-up question in the chat. Meanwhile, I will move into another question, which is simple Python commands. So Python in Grist is used for formulas. Some of them you saw here. For example, here's a formula that kept positive numbers, but replaced negative ones with an empty value. Here was a more sophisticated formula a little bit that took a string with a minus in it, split it, and returned the last element. And in the summary tables, you've seen the formula which adds up values by using the sum function. Let me show you another very helpful Python formula that you can do. And that would be if you wanted to do anything more with dates. One thing that would be useful is if we could see our expenses, how they change by month. I should be able to get the month because I have the date, but I don't actually have a column called month. So if I try to make a summary and I want to select, group by month, I don't have a month. So let's add one. I'll add a column. Alt plus is a shortcut that's a column. I'll call it month. And here's the formula. By the way, if you're watching one of these webinars for the first time, or if you're new to Grist, you'll notice I click on a random cell in the column, I hit an equal sign, and I write a formula. And this formula will apply to the whole column. That's one of the differences between Grist and a typical spreadsheet. The formula will always apply to the whole column. In this case, I want to start this formula with the date. And that's a Python date object. And it has this super useful Python function called stirf_time, which is what it means is string format time, I guess. That's what it means. And it takes these special string with these special tokens, %y for year, %m for month. And if I use this incantation, which I use often actually in practice, I get this result, the year dash and then the month and nothing else. So as soon as I have this result, I can add a new page, summarize by month. And here you go. I will sort it as well. This is one of the reasons I like this particular incantation when I have numerical year first and month second, because when you sort it, it will sort correctly. If I used months like January, February, then it would be harder to sort correctly. But here it is, and for each month they see expenses. I see that this month has the most, and so this kind of data would be great to see as a chart. So let's do that as well. So I'll add widget to page, group it the same way. Let me change this widget now to a chart. Add it to a page. Let's give it more space. Now this chart has, I think it's trying to show every numerical column I have. That's a little too much for me. Let me see in the chart configuration what it's really showing. The x-axis is month. That's great. That's what I want. The count of transactions, I don't care. The total amount, I don't care. I see here expenses and credits are mostly payments for the credit card, so I don't really care about that either. So I'll just leave expenses here. That's it. There's my expenses by month. And note that this chart is not linked. If you compare it to the chart we added here, if you recall, we linked it to a table. And that you can see in this, if you click change widgets, you can see the select by. If you click on this table and click change widgets, you see it's selected by another widget. In this case, we didn't do anything like that. This is just our totals over all history that we have. And this is the same data in a tabular form. And so there is another example of using Python formulas. Any other questions? Please do ask. I'm hoping to get another question or two. What would be the best way to view previous views? Version history. Okay. So the views we have of our data are, they're always here, and we should also rename it to be useful. This table we don't need. So here we create this whole layout, and the views are always here. The reason the views changed really is because we just imported more data. If we wanted to see, let's say, data from one card versus another, we could add another dimension kind of to distinguish between the two cards. But if we just want to see what did our document look like earlier today or half a year ago, there is a document history here. And that's a feature that's very useful kind of for your confidence in your data. because if you mess something up, you here have a history of previous versions. And so if I go here to 2:58 p.m., I will know that it's going to be an empty document. But at 2:41 p.m., it'll be, let's see, open snapshots. It will have most of my data, including this page. I was adding around that time, I think, but not including the page of months or the formulas with months that I added. Though this, I think, must have just started adding things. The way the snapshot history works is that for the very recent few minutes, it keeps them more frequently, but then it only keeps one snapshot an hour or so, and further back one snapshot a day, and further back one snapshot a week, and so on. So that's why I don't have actually snapshots in between these two intervals. But for any practical use, you will see a snapshot from yesterday or from the week before, and so on. And here you can click back to current to return to the current version of the document. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any more questions, so I think we can end here today. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you. This was awesome.